and you'll get whatever you get out of that. Is that more unconditional trade-off? I should say a thing or two quickly about, in hindsight, about the event, because, for instance, one minor little detail is that some of the details that I'm aware of now, right, that I have been aware of, should really never be brought to light, that phrase brought to light, or made public. In other words, what good would it do for me to give information to a surviving relative how traumatic it was for their spouse, or how non-something. In other words, non-traumatic. In other words, in the last few minutes, not even minutes, in the last few seconds of the plane flight, when it was obvious that something was terribly wrong. In other words, when they bounced off the field, they didn't really experience the car being crushed. And on the people on the plane did not really experience that. The jarring and G-forces of coming back up off the field, it was just like part of that. In other words, they didn't experience a separate event of the trucks or the tires crushing the car on the expressway where the mechanic died. What did the mechanic in the car experience? I will publicly share that I'm aware of the last few seconds. And of course, he was dealing with his birthday, the extraordinary, beautiful love of his wife and kids. In other words, he was just like mulling over in his mind. It was his birthday. His family was back, I believe, in Mississippi. And he can't wait to bring him out to Texas because he's getting financially squared away now. He's got a full-time job, all the joy of that. And dealing with how much he appreciated his uncle staying at his house temporarily while he got the new residence established. And that wasn't portrayed in the movie, I don't think. Again, I'm going off in too many details, personalized details, but he was so proud that he'd already made arrangements for things. And see, I don't know how much his wife even knows today as to how much he had already done for the new residents. I'll say it that way. In that part of the phone conversation, the surprise happy birthday would be additional details that, guess what? You can come out here sooner.
Yeah.
Those sort of things. Of what value is that to the spouse, to his wife? Probably none at all in the long run. And yet, compassionately, to know that he experienced a minimal of discomfort. In other words, in time frame, it was like mulling all these beautiful, wonderful things over in his mind and kind of coping with the obvious storm coming, which was just reaching him. And as he was in the rain part of it and the severe gusty winds, and then to just be there and just quickly look like that. And then, in other words, how traumatic was that? Well, to just go, there's not even enough time to take a breath before he was in a clinical death state, an unconscious state, not able to breathe, and so on. And that was the actual physical death part of it, because it happened so quickly and so dramatically that his body was just crushed. All right. Now, if we can have compassion for somebody who dies of cancer over a 3-year period or a prolonged oncoming death, judgmentally, we take a little bit of comfort into knowing that, well, he didn't die a long, prolonged death. He had an aneurysm and he died in a few seconds. In other words, he was out of pain in a half of a minute. So regarding the mechanic, it would be fair to say that he was not in any physical trauma at all to speak of, other than the amount of time of seeing something abnormal, which was, in his perception, if I dare say that, just this large, dark thing. In other words, if a snowball hits the side of your car window,
Yeah.
at the moment you don't even know what it is, and it's a shocking thing. And then you have to stop and see and then say, oh, it's a snowball. All right, well, none of that time was taken. In other words, he did, with his physical eyes, look to the side window and see what we know is the wheels. He didn't know it was wheels. He didn't know it was an airplane. He knew just instantly that it was something not good. And then he was unconscious, not able to function in any respect. Notice he was already in a state of clinical death. And that's very beautiful because that then automatically propelled him into the clinical death state, which we know is the onset of the near-death experience. And that is judgmentally a good thing, not a bad thing, regardless of how much of a life review he had and the circumstances of his transition into what we say is death, which is just the future life that we're going to be living very differently from what we live now. So there can be a degree of comfort in say, giving information like that to a spouse, but other circumstances where there was a severe burning, prolonged agony, if you will, that's pretty much worthless. If we're so spiritually evolved, we know that the physical trauma, the psychological trauma in a death, an oncoming death state, meaning the thing that you die from, the act of dying. And the act of dying can be painful and gross. That's okay, that's justifiable, because spiritually we often know that the trauma that you experience in your life is for a purpose. No, all the physical pain isn't totally justifiable. Some you bring on yourself, some is accidental, some is... But spiritually, most of us know that there is a cause and effect relationship, and it's usually justifiable. So in that respect, we can deal with the sadness of the tragedy involved. As I'm talking, I'm missing something that I wanted to include in this taping, because we talked about the precognition aspect of it. How do you deal with things of this nature? How am I able to cope with the psychological aspects of it alone? I know it's very often, let me state that there's a new phrase like post-stress syndrome or post-trauma syndrome. Kind of came out of the Vietnam War, post-combat stress and things like that. And I've been questioned several times by many clinicians and so on. Tom, have you ever heard of such a thing? Because they didn't want to suggest it to me either. So very carefully they said, how are you able to deal with things that we would never expect a professional clinician or a professional emergency medical technician who might deal with this on a daily basis? You're none of those things. And how can you function normally? How can you go to sleep at night? And I don't have a good explanation for that. But let me put it this way. With the extraordinary experience initially I had in the near-death experience and being part of that light, that says it all. I mean, all the stuff that we deal with as our priorities, right now watching this film, this taping is a priority. And we're learning new things about precognitions, and that's a priority. Well, wait a minute. Are you suddenly forgetting about the thing you did bad last night? See, the thing you did naughty or bad last night isn't a priority. And it's like nothingness. It's part of your history. And it is you, but it's not a priority anymore. And I'll sound like I'm bragging, but I've got an extraordinary ability so far, not talking about tomorrow, of emotionally and psychologically on the humanistic level to prioritize and rationalize, why me? Why do I have to know this? Why did I know this ahead of time? Will there be things that I'm shocked about? And the answer is yes, there will. I mean, I'm sure that there will be within the next couple of days. Will Todd be able to call me in the next 48 hours or so and say, Dad, thanks so much for warning me about whatever this day is? Will that be joyous for me, or will that be traumatic for me? It doesn't really matter in the long run, because I do have, which I'm counting on, I mean, hopefully I can count on, this overriding, or shall I say underlying, awareness of the light at the end of the tunnel. And that no matter how traumatic and bad things are, no matter how I deal with things in general, that it'll all come out in the wash, and that'll all be either justifiable or that it'll just be understood. but at least it will be understood. And that our job is to try to understand now. If we succeed or not, it isn't so important as long as we try. And that full understanding will be had by everybody in their transitional state, in their life review, or in the next life. How'd that sound?
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you, and I love you.